Hello there. How are you, everybody? I'm fine, except that Facebook has once again changed how it allows us to share. And so I couldn't find some of my groups. It's only allowing one now to start a watch party, evidently, with one group. And you cannot check off a bunch of groups at once. Facebook's a real pain. Hi, Dolores. Hey, Rob, nice to see you. And Rob says, Yay, I'm here to finally watch you live in a long time. Yay! Yay! And Rebecca McClaskey says, Hello, Joe. Hi, Rebecca. Rob says, How are you, Yoda? I'm fine. I'm fine, thank you. I've been enjoying myself streaming and doing short takes. Carmen says, but my account is out of Fascist Book Jail. I can share an invite now. Well, that's great, Carmen. Please be careful. Don't get an FB jail again anytime soon. Bonnie says, Hi, this should be fun. Carmen says, Hi, nice that you're here too. Steve Wolfman says, Hi. And Cora Emanuel says, Hey there. Hey there. And Kay says, Hi, glad to see you. Alva says, Hi, the burnt wolf, quote unquote. Burnt wolf? Steve says, I just shared to a bunch of groups at once. How'd you do that, Steve? I could not figure out how to do that at once. How'd you do it? Tell me how. I need instruction. Every once in a while, I need instruction in Facebook. They change this, or they change that, or they change the other thing. And then the ways you were doing things don't work anymore, and you got to try something else. Anyway, let me know, Steve. I'll be grateful. Avril says, Hi, Starshine. How's that go? Good morning, Starshine. Okay, so this is Q&A. So the ball is in your court. I need some Q's so I can give some A's. If you're not ready to Q, then I'll do something a little different for a few minutes and see if that stimulates you to get me some Q's so I can do some A's. And Stacy says, I think FB is saning all the posts and slowing stuff down. Alpha says, Oh, is that a song? Awesome. Good morning, Starshine. Yeah. That's from Hair. Kay says, I hate new FB, so slow to do anything. I couldn't just go to the share button and go to groups. I couldn't do that. It might be that's available on your newsfeed. That option could be available on the newsfeed, but it wasn't available on my timeline page. When I push the share, it immediately forces me to select some place where I'm going to do a watch party. I'm not really doing a watch party in any group. I'm doing a watch party on my own timeline. Stacy says Q, Q, Q. And William O'Brien says eco economy, what's that? Oh, it's eco as in ecological. And it's usually about the kind of economics that's consistent with the ecology we live in. It's an economics of sustainability. Kay says you have to click on more options. I didn't see any more options, Kay. I'm telling you, they changed my interface. They changed my interface. Maybe if I use this interface, start a watch party, it says see all. Nope. I don't understand the new interface on my page anyway. But anyway, thank you for sharing. Please keep on sharing, since I'm a little crippled tonight till I figure this out. I'm refreshing my page now. Oops. Double checking my sound. Looks all right. Okay, Avril says, of course, if you're using a new Facebook, it would let you change back if you're an admin of a group. The option is in the group. Thank you, Cora. Avril says she has a recommendation. Can you perhaps add time and date when featuring the short takes? It can help me keep up with which ones I've missed and which ones I've already seen. Thank you for your consideration. Okay, I think I can do that. I think I can do that after the fact. I think it can be easy to do that after the fact. But in the meantime, the short takes on YouTube, okay, all have times and dates attached to them, if I'm not mistaken. Avril says, sound check good, no great. And William O'Brien says, what do you have to say about an ecological economic system? Do you have any insight as to how that would work? Well, it has to do with a type, okay, of economics that emphasizes real world sustainability. In other words, it's about economic policies that are oriented to having a sustainable human system. Do I have any insight as to how that would work? Well, the way it would work is that in order to develop such an economics, you have to be able to do impact analysis after the fact, and you have to have some notion of how to predict actually before the fact, so you can gauge the likely impact of your policies, okay, your economic policies. And these would be concerned with a whole host of impacts: climate justice, environmental justice, racial justice, equality. It might be there would be a range of measures and a range, okay, of values. From my point of view, what it would be an economics for public purpose, because certainly sustainability would be included in any public the purpose and any reasonable notion, okay, of public purpose. Now, since one value that's characteristic of the MMT approach to economics is that the public policy is to be enacted for public purpose, that suggests that MMT economics is at least one type, okay, of ecological economics. Won't go so far as to say that, okay, it's eco-socialist economics, but it is very likely to have a much larger admixture of socialism in the economy than we currently have in the mixed economy that we're not enjoying today. Kay says, not anymore for me. I'm stuck with new FB now. Carmen says, I got my anxiety snack ready. Stacy Van Veen says, incentives, prizes, laugh out loud. Steve Wolfman says, they're really an eco-economy unless you're Amish. Humans aren't good for ecology. Which Planet of the Humans, okay, by Michael Moore. I didn't say there was an eco-economy right now. What I said is that we could be aiming towards an eco-economy, and we had better be aiming towards an eco-economy, because if we don't aim towards an eco-economy, we're not going to survive. We've got to aim towards it, and we got to get there. And according to the IPCC, we got about 10 years to do it, to get on track, to get to an eco-economy. And William O'Brien says, does everything need to be compostable? I don't know if everything needs to be compostable, but I think that everything has to be recyclable in some way. Has to be recyclable, okay, unless we can vent certain things into outer space. Thank you, honey. And Evelina says, big agro and fossil fuel industry are not humans, laugh out loud. Well, they are anti-human, right? But a lot of things we're doing are anti-human and anti-animal and anti-plant and anti-ocean. Avril says people must stop their enslavement to materialism. Well, Carmen, I'm not sure what you mean by that. I kind of have a general idea, okay, of what you mean by that. But okay, I'm afraid to some degree we're all chained to the material. Now, if that's what you mean by materialism, I don't know if we're going to be able to stop our enslavement to it. But if you mean what I think you mean, yes, we do have to stop that kind of enslavement. Evelina Ponte says, Avro? Avro says, eco-economy, isn't that the GND? Well, the Green New Deal is a sort of an approach to a set of policies that would be designed to get us to an ecologically sustainable economy. Yes, that is right. Evelina says, Avromano, consumerism, you must mean a material existence is compatible with physical beings. Or do you mean to say with psychical beings? Or do you mean to say that a material existence is compatible with spiritual being? I'm not sure. Stacy says, I just want lots and lots of hot water. Are you lacking hot water at this point, Stacy? Kay says, hemp and bamboo are the two plants that can help save the world. Well, inform me about bamboo. I know that hemp can be very, very valuable in saving the world. But fill me in on bamboo. Joanne Ricardo says, stop spending money on non-essentials. Well, I wish we could, but I don't think we all agree on what are essentials and non-essentials, right? Avril says, materialism has us enslaved to neoliberalism. Maybe it's the other way around. Maybe it is neoliberalism that has us enslaved to materialism. Avril says, yes, Evelina, good point. Stacy says, no, but I love hot water. I love hot water too. I didn't realize how much I loved hot water until on Monday this past week. We didn't have any water at all here. The water was cut off because a pipe had burst in the middle of the night on Sunday without any warning. So we weren't able to draw any water, and we just didn't have any water. No water. Only the water we had in the refrigerator, only the water we had in the closet, which we had to use very sparingly to wash ourselves in a minimal way so we could go out and do the shopping. So I came to appreciate hot water more than I normally appreciate it. You really appreciate it when you don't have access to it. And Rebecca says, the biggest stopgap in getting people to accept the changes for the ecological balance is convenience. Too many creatures of convenience. That is the biggest block, actually, because to a great degree, we're all creatures of convenience. Avril says, bamboo is my favorite scent. I'm afraid Shalimar is my favorite scent. And Bonnie obligingly wears it. Kay says, bamboo can replace wood. Avril says, correct, Dr. Joe. Joanne says, learn to live simply and within your means. Yes, Joanne, we have been spending a lot of time doing that. With a little bit of success. Evelina says, comfort. And Will O'Brien says, when the politics is dependent on selfish interests, support corporate individualistic. How could they do the greater long-term environment any good? I don't think they can. I think that's what we're seeing. That's exactly what we're seeing. Kay says, no water sucks. That old apartment building I lived in but did that a few times. Yeah, this does it every once in a while here. You know, in recent years when they build places, they've quit using copper tubing for the plumbing because it's too expensive. And they've got, I don't know whether they're plastic pipes or what kinds of pipes they have, but they're bursting. They frequently seem to burst or spring leaks or stuff like that. So they have to turn off the water. But usually it's for a brief time only. Like, they'll turn it off in the morning or something and it's back by 1 o'clock. And usually they'll give you some warning so you can draw water to tide you over. But this time it was a total surprise. Joanne says, Shalimar, and opium, my favorite. I must confess I'm unfamiliar, with opium, but very familiar with Shalimar. Albert says, I briefly saw something about water being traded on Wall Street as a commodity. The author John Perkins foretold of this in his American Jackal book. Stacy says, hot water is probably the biggest energy suck in my repertoire. That is why I mentioned it. Refrigerators suck a lot of energy as well. Not giving up either, though. Well, I don't think we're giving up either for the time being anyway. And Rebecca says, oh, Avro, I wondered about that when I saw articles about Nestle buying up water rights from municipalities. Yeah, I think they bought up a lot of water rights in California also, haven't they? Avro says, on my second helping of pasta with mushrooms. Yeah, mushrooms are delicious, aren't they? And Joanne says, but neoliberals are dependent on us spending money and using credit. Don't do it unless absolutely necessary. Well, they keep on giving us money to spend to keep the economy going, which really means to keep them continuing to make profits. Evelina says, in some places water is privatized. I know. Evelina says, delish. And Stacy says, Nestle doesn't buy. They apply to municipalities and get water for free. Okay. I've come to the end of your comments for the time being. So, Avril says, nom, nom, nom. Yes, they are typing with my mouth full. Okay, I'm going to take a couple of minutes to briefly go through something, else, and then maybe you'll have some questions backed up. I'm going to share the screen with a little, with a graphic. If I can find the graphics, there it is. Okay. Of course, you've been seeing the Amy Coney Barrett thing, right? Let me give you the full view of this. I take it you've been paying some attention to the Amy Coney Barrett thing. So, the thing with by Justice Ginsburg's death and the fight over Amy Coney Barrett and whether she's going to be confirmed, okay, or not, raises the longer-term issue of what are we going to do about the Supreme Court? It's been a disaster now for a long time. It's been supporting the plutocracy and the oligarchy, and it's been driving us towards an anti-democratic system. So here are some things that people have been mentioning, that people have been talking about. First of all, in order to do anything in relation to passing a progressive agenda, we're going to have to get rid of the filibuster, and probably to have votes in Congress which can do anything about the court system, the appellate courts, particularly the Supreme Court. We're going to have to be able to pass bills with only majority votes in both houses, okay, of Congress. So what are the things we can do to tame the power of the appellate courts? One thing is we can expand the Supreme Court, okay, and other appellate courts. This is frequently spoken of as court packing. But it's a more neutral term to talk about expanding the number of justices on the court. This is perfectly legal, of course, according to the Constitution. And people have plans for this. And we've been seeing some of the plans appear. But Franklin Roosevelt, of course, famously tried to do this. People called his effort a failure because he failed to expand or pack the court. But the effort was a great success because it caused the Supreme Court to turn around in its voting, or more precisely, it caused one justice, by the name of Owen Roberts, to change sides and create a 5-4 voting situation, which allowed Franklin Roosevelt in 1937 and later to sustain some of the key programs he had passed, like, for example, a minimum wage, like, for example, Social Security, and like, for example, not the NRA, but the NIRA, which was later passed. So the Supreme Court quit declaring his laws unconstitutional. And he accomplished that by persuading one of the justices who had been in the 5-4 conservative majority to switch over to the other side in order to avoid packing the court. So Roosevelt was successful in his objective, not in his objective of packing the court, but in the greater objective of getting a legislation he had successfully passed in the Congress sustained by the court. So a second thing that could be done is jurisdiction stripping. The Constitution allows the Congress to regulate the cases that the Supreme Court will have jurisdiction over, or that any of the appellate courts will have jurisdiction over. This is in what is known as the Exceptions Clause, Article 3, Section 2 of the Constitution. An interesting historical sidelight on this is that a very interesting report on jurisdiction stripping was written by John Roberts when he was, I believe, he was a deputy attorney general of the United States under Ronald Reagan. And he was given the task of researching what could be done to get around some of the decisions of the Supreme Court, which were at the time much too liberal for the Reagan administration. So he researched and wrote a very interesting report on how Article 3, Section 2 could be used to do this, and how there were precedents where the Congress had stripped the jurisdiction of appellate courts in the past. And you see on this slide, there's a link to the Roberts report, the PDF. So in other words, the current Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, is an authority on Article 3, Section 2, and what it allows you to do, on how it could be used to strip jurisdiction from the current Supreme Court if we don't want them to decide on certain things. For example, if we pass some new bills dealing with money in politics, we could put the Exceptions Clause, as it applies to money in politics, into the legislation, and the Supreme Court would not be able to review the legislation and declare it unconstitutional. The same could be done with Medicare for all. The same could be done with legislation allowing birth control. If that were done, then Amy Coney Barrett and some of the other Republican justices or conservative justices would not even get a chance to review the legislation. Something else that could be done to tame the courts is to put in term limits for courts. And Ro Khanna just introduced a bill into the Congress today to introduce term limits for justices in appellate courts, of 18 years. I put in 10 to 18 years there because I don't think there's anything magic about the 18 years. It might be a 10-year term. It might be a 12-year term. It might be a 14-year term, and so on. We don't know what the ideal term is for justices. Ideally, we would want a term that is long enough so justices are independent of the political trends and are capable of having some degree of objectivity. But on the other hand, we don't want to have a situation where justices are there for 30 or 40 years and they're failing to keep up with trends in the society, which is in many cases the kind of situation we have now. For example, the reasoning sustaining the very unpopular Citizens United decision by the Supreme Court, the facts and suppositions on which that particular decision has rested turned out to be totally unrealistic assumptions Anthony Kennedy was making in sustaining that particular decision have been shown to be totally wrong. And it is suggested if he had any familiarity with the internet and social media, he would likely have known that to be true and would never have decided in the way he did decide it. So sometimes justices of the Supreme Court can just be out of date and render terrible decisions because they are out of date. So in any case, if what we're looking to do is to tone down the power of the Supreme Court and make things more democratic, if we want to assert democracy, because we have to recognize the Supreme Court is undemocratic, right? It's an elitist institution. So if we want to be able to assert the supremacy of democracy over the Supreme Court, we have to tone down the power of the Supreme Court. And another method for doing that is term limits. Okay, and yet another method is you could require a court supermajority to overturn a law. So instead of allowing 5-4 decisions to render a law unconstitutional, you might want to require a supermajority of 6-3 or 7-2 or something like that. Of course, Amy Coney Barrett's her appointment would create a situation where there's a probable 6-3 supermajority on lots of actions of the Supreme Court. So that might not contain the current Supreme Court too much if one feels it's way out of line with what the majority of the country thinks and that it has to be somehow checked. One other thing you could do is you could empower a supermajority of Congress, for example, 67% of each house, to overturn a court ruling of unconstitutionality. So, in other words, if the court rules something unconstitutional, Congress could still save it if you were able to muster a supermajority of each house. And of course, you could use any or all of these 5 methods in combination. So I prepared that as kind of a fail-safe to hopefully grease the ways to more comments and more questions. I will go back to the usual view of myself. And I'll go back to your comments now. Stacy says, I like butterscotch chips, and so far I haven't found a Nestle alternative. If everybody has info on a competitor, LMK, which I think is let me know. Kay says, talk about the new SCOTUS wanting to get rid of the Affordable Care Act. Well, I don't know. I don't think John Roberts wants to get rid of the Affordable Care Act. Okay. On the other hand, I suspect Amy Coney Barrett does want to get rid of the Affordable Care Act. And that might just create a situation where there is a 5-4 vote in favor of declaring the Affordable Care Act unconstitutional. That, of course, would be a disaster for many people. And there is supposed to be a ruling. They're supposed to be taking up the challenge to the Affordable Care Act 1 week after the election. Now, they won't be deciding it then, but they'll probably be deciding it in January or February, of next year. Maybe if there's a Democratic Congress, they'll quickly do something about it. All they have to do to save the Affordable Care Act is to repeal the mandate as part of the law. Just take it out of the law completely. It's still in the law. And the basis of the challenge is that the mandate is still in the law. And the basis of the challenge is that since the tax was ruled out of order by the courts, that means the mandate can no longer be justified as a tax, which is the grounds John Roberts was using to sustain the Affordable Care Act. So now that there's no tax to back up the mandate, it's only an empty letter anyway, right now. So it would take a one-line amendment for the Democrats to just pass an amendment to the Affordable Care Act to get rid of the mandate entirely. Nobody believes the mandate is important anymore because basically, since the court decision getting rid of the tax, we've been operating without a mandate, and it doesn't seem to have changed enrollment in the Affordable Care Act any. People still sign up for the Affordable Care Act, so they didn't need the mandate anyway. All the theorizing about how a mandate was necessary was wrong. Jeez, who knew? A lot of us knew. Stacy says, Barrett thinks the subdivision of West Virginia from Virginia was wrong. Well, that's interesting. As I recall, what happened was West Virginia seceded from Virginia during the Civil War. And then the North let in West Virginia as a separate state. So I suppose she could argue that if the secession of the South, was illegal, then the secession of West Virginia was also illegal. That's probably her argument. I don't think it's such a bad argument. I would offer something else to you also. If it turned out that that was invalidated by a decision of the Supreme Court, maybe the people of West Virginia would like to join Virginia. I mean, it might be good for them. It strikes me we have government in Virginia that is much more effective at taking care of the citizens of this state than the government of West Virginia seems to be able to do for the people of that state. Maybe the West Virginians would be better off being just folded into Virginia. I mean, we don't have great senators, but at least we don't have anybody as bad as Joe Manchin and Shelley Moore Capito. And I think our governor is a much better governor in terms of the public interest than the governor of West Virginia is. But anyway, I'm just, observing this from afar. But maybe we'll get a change in some of the West Virginia leaders fairly soon. I'm hoping Paula Jean Swearengin can get rid of Shelley Moore Capito. That would be excellent. Paula Jean's a great one. And Joanne says, disgusted with Trump and all his choices for government seats. Avro says, oh man, Amy Coney Barrett is Aunt Lydia and will have us all saying, under his eye. Is that something from The Handmaids? She's supposed to be a member of a Catholic set that is cultish, on which the series The Handmaidens or The Handmaids are based. I've never even seen it, so I don't know what to call that, but anyway, I may have seen little clips from it. And Rebecca McClaskey says, the court with Barrett will lead to, what it will lead to probably is a whole bunch of the things I put up there. Specifically, it may lead to getting rid of the filibuster, which I think we're well on the way to doing anyway, expanding the Supreme Court, jurisdiction stripping, term limits of justices. I mean, maybe all of those at least. All of those at least. Stacy says, too many freaking Catholics on the court. Well, okay, today I was reminded that there are 6 Catholics on the court and 2 Jews on the court. And I gotta wonder what the evangelical Christians have to say about that. It seems passing strange to me that they haven't wanted to have some evangelical Christian justices on the court, some fundamentalist Protestants on the court. So that's interesting. So the court is full of minorities at this point. If Amy Coney Barrett gets on the court, then there will be 7 Catholics and 2 Jews. Kay says, I have cleaned out my Too Rich bank account so I can reapply for expanded Medicaid. But if the ACA is gone, so that will be gone. I don't know if the ACA is going to be gone. If the Democrats get a majority in both houses of Congress, as I said, they can amend the ACA with the offending clause out of it, just out of it, and then it will be good to go. And Alvaro said, Markey posted that but today about getting rid of the filibuster and expanding the court. You're a psychic, Dr. Joe. No, I'm not a psychic. I just read I've read a lot about this stuff. I know a lot about the court and the filibuster. I've written a good deal about the filibuster because there was a lot of talk about getting rid of the filibuster during 2009 and 2010 when we wanted to pass to pass a Medicare for All bill. But the idea of expanding the courts has been getting a lot of attention, of late. There's an article by Jeet here, which appeared in The Nation. I'll add it to the description of this post so you have it. And there's also an article that was written by Tom Hartman for Raw Story recently. And that's a very excellent article talking about all sorts of methods. Well, I'm talking about a few of the methods that I talked about here in detail, going over the history and going over the precedents. It's a very good article by Tom. It's lengthy, but it's a very good article by Tom. Both articles, though, the Here article and the Hartman article, are both very good. And before I prepared my slide, I reviewed those two articles and also made use of my background knowledge from way back. At one point, I would say at one point in time, but that's really redundant, but at one point, a long time ago, I did take constitutional law in undergraduate school, and I really enjoyed it. I was very good at it, and ever since then, I've taken a great interest in constitutional law and in the decisions of the Supreme Court. I happen to have a type of mind that logic chops that stuff fairly well. And Avril says, Evelina Pont, there you are, darling. You said it better than me. And Avril says, oh, captions just came on? Captions? Where are captions? Rebecca says, I've always believed that the court was required to be fair and balanced, so the idea of an unbalanced court shocks me. I guess that was part of my magical thinking about our nation. Now I am embarrassed to admit it. Well, the history of the court has much from my studies of the court, I would say the court has been mostly, it has from an ideological point of view, been mostly unbalanced. Mostly unbalanced all the time. There is a period from 1905 to 1937, which is often called the period of the Lochner Court. It's named after a decision rendered in 1905, okay, in the Lochner case. And that case rendered unconstitutional, if I recall correctly, a child labor law. And the doctrines stated in that case basically ruled the 14th Amendment did not actually provide basic constitutional rights to children, okay, in that instance. Okay, and the doctrines of the Lochner Court, though not the justices, seem to prevail from 1905 up through the change I just talked about in 1937. Franklin Roosevelt had a good bit of success in appointing new justices to the Supreme Court, but by 1937, only 4 of the justices who were on his side and 5 of the justices, okay, were against him. And they were still propounding the doctrines, okay, of the Lochner Court. When the stitch in time that saved the 9 happened, in other words, when Owen Roberts switched sides and gave a majority to Roosevelt, that was only the beginning. Soon after, the conservatives, the 4 conservatives, left the court and were replaced by Roosevelt-appointed justices, all of whom were in favor of the New Deal and swallowed whole the doctrines that allowed the New Deal to go forward. And so then the court, from there on, the court was ideologically unbalanced towards what at that time was the left. Now, I don't mean to say that it was unbalanced in any pejorative sense. From my point of view, it was a court in line with the times and more in line with the kind of progress the United States actually needed at that particular time. And as time went on, and with the appointment, okay, of Earl Warren to the Supreme Court and other justices, okay, that were appointed by Eisenhower and by Kennedy and by Johnson, the Supreme Court continued over time to be very unbalanced towards the liberal side. And to my mind, that was very good for the United States, okay, and very good for a country that was tending towards equal justice for all. Of course, things began to turn around during the 1980s. And they began to turn around still more with the appointment of Clarence Thomas to the Supreme Court and Antonin Scalia to the Supreme Court. And then things started shifting the other way. And they shifted the other way a lot when it came to economics. The court became very pro-corporate. And it still is generally. It still is, generally speaking, very, very pro-corporate. It may be fair to say that all of the remaining 8 justices on the Supreme Court were pro-corporate. And even Ruth Bader Ginsburg had her moments in favoring the corporate side of certain kinds of decisions. Of course, she was a very liberal justice, but that was mostly from the identity politics side. Not when you think of it from the economics. In other words, when you think of it from the viewpoint of the class struggle, she was not where the New Deal justices were. She was concerned with other issues. So what I'm saying is, if you study the history of the court, You very rarely see a balanced court in relation to the ideological trends of the time. What you usually see is a court that's stacked for one side or the other. We had courts stacked for the corporations in the United States, certainly from the 1870s going forward, increasingly biased towards the corporate justices and conservative justices. And this was all the way until the New Deal. From the end of the Civil War until the New Deal, that was the case. Anyway, the courts have been very political, try as they might to hide it. Anybody who studied the court for a long period of time and who has studied the voting behavior of the court, which I did a lot of in graduate school, by the way. I was a graduate assistant for professors who studied decision making on the Supreme Court and how they were voting on the Supreme Court and how they aligned themselves into ideological blocks. And you could see the patterns. I mean, these were statistical studies, essentially blocking, dividing the Supreme Court justices into blocks and showing how they voted consistently in particular directions as opposed to other directions. This was back in the 1960s when I was in graduate school. I got my PhD in 1965. So this was the early 1960s. And that kind of behavior was going on then. And it still is. It has never changed. That kind of behavior has never changed. The court has definite political coalitions within it. Now, they've not necessarily been political in relation to the parties. In other words, there's the idea of being nonpartisan with respect to the two major parties. But that doesn't mean that justices of the court are not extremely partisan when it comes to ideology. They are. They are partisan when it comes to ideology. Avril says politicians are playing ruthless now. NK says, don't be ashamed, as many people have no clue, Rebecca. Evelina says, retirement age in Argentina, I believe it's 70 to 73. Wow. That's old. Here, the normal retirement age is 65, of course, but a lot of people work after they've retired at 65. For various reasons. Some don't want to retire. But technically they've retired because maybe they're getting Social Security. You may have noticed that I am one of those who has never retired in that sense. Obviously, I'm still working. I mean, I love this, but I'm still working. And Rebecca says, I was taught that in school and just accepted it. The embarrassment comes that I accepted it for 38 years. Well, don't be embarrassed. You have to study the Supreme Court to learn that the idea that the Supreme Court is fair and balanced is a mistake. It's like the idea that Fox News is fair and balanced. That's also a mistake. Kay says, we were all taught wrong in school. We learned the hard way. Deborah says, I was doing other stuff. I'm here now. And Rebecca says, I think the justices should be appointed and nominated by elected judges who would be elected to appellate courts. No appointments from executive branches at federal or state level. No, I think I like better the checks and balances, the type of system. I think I'd like better the system we have now. I don't know, though. I'd like to hear more about this in detail. I mean, maybe they should be appointed and nominated by elected judges who would be elected to appellate courts. That would be a similar situation to popes, right? Well, I guess it wouldn't be, because the popes actually are elected by cardinals who were appointed by previous popes. And people got to be cardinals only by appointment. They didn't come up from the bottom. So, no, that would be different. Yeah, I guess I've got to think about that for a while. That might not be a bad way to do it. Susan says, should the Democrats get rid of the ACA mandate? Sure they should. I mean, it's not effective now anyway. Will the Dems get rid of the mandate, and why haven't they done so already? Well, they haven't had control of the Congress for some time. They haven't had control of the Congress since the beginning of 2011. And they only had the stupid mandate because they insisted on passing the ACA instead of H.R. 676, which was available at the time. Have there been any cuts to the ACA as a result of removing the tax? No. No, that tax hasn't caused a fall off in ACA coverage. There are other things that have caused a fall off in ACA coverage, like harassments of various kinds by the Trump administration, the fact that people have been losing their jobs right and left, and they can't afford to pay the premiums under the ACA. Okay, Deborah says only premium increases. That's right. Cora says, well, if the Supreme Court invalidates the ACA, it'll be incumbent on the Democrats to enact expanded Medicare for all. I completely agree. I think it's incumbent on them to pass expanded Medicare for all anyway. But certainly if the Supreme Court invalidates the ACA, in fact, if people see the Supreme Court is considering invalidating the ACA, okay, and the Democrats get control of the executive branch in Congress in January, the first thing they should do is to enact H.R. 1384 and be done with it. And put a little clause in it also that says that if the ACA is invalidated by the Supreme Court, then those people who no longer have coverage on the ACA can sign up to be covered under Medicare. Okay, because Medicare, there will be a transition period between the passage, okay, of Medicare for all and the coverage, okay, for everybody. Okay, and it will take time to sign up everybody, okay, and to implement it. But there's going to be a transition period. There is a transition period built in HR, built into HR 1384 to give the insurance companies a chance to adjust. So, if you just put a little clause in the Medicare for All bill that says that those people who do to having preconditions are thrown off their ACA insurance or no longer have their ACA insurance because the law, okay, was invalidated, that all those people will be eligible for standard Medicare during the transition period. Of course, during the transition period, those 55, okay, and over, according to HR 1384, will be covered as soon as coverage begins under the law, which is at the end of the first year. In other words, within 1 year of its passage. But in that year, there will be a transition period of getting organized, okay, and getting ready. And so, the people who become uncovered due to the invalidation, okay, of ACA could immediately be covered by standard Medicare. All they would have to do to be covered is to go and register for Medicare, okay, at the usual places, and have their Social Security cards. That's all they would need. Okay, Rebecca McCloskey. If West Virginia rejoined Virginia, there would be 2 less senators. Yes, that's true. I suppose we could fight that by changing the Senate. It's time we change the Senate anyway. Maybe we just need to get rid of it and have a unicameral type of legislature like they have in Nebraska. And Nebraska went wild with the progressive approach in the early 1900s, and they have only one house there, only one house of Congress, only one house, okay, in their legislature. It's worked perfectly fine for Nebraska. I don't know why it wouldn't be fine for the United States. Of course, we'd have to change the Constitution for that one. West Virginia rejoined Virginia, there would be 2 less senators. There would be. So Paula Jean Swearingen would have to run against Tim Kaine. Should be a big improvement. Should be a big improvement over either Tim Kaine, or Mark Warner. Kay says, I hope so, Cara. Susan says, I think it would be very hard to get rid of the ACA. The last time they tried to do this, the public outcry was enormous. Yeah, but the thing about the Supreme Court is that a Supreme Court makes a decision that the ACA is unconstitutional. It's gone at that point. So probably what the Democrats ought to do is, as soon as they get into office and before any decision has come down from the Supreme Court, they should get rid of the mandate. By the way, that would moot that case. It would no longer be a case with a controversy. There'd be no controversy then, because the challenge was based on the idea that there was no tax anymore. So the mandate was unconstitutional because it was no longer a tax. That's what the challenge is based on. So if they simply repeal the mandate, the case K is moot, and Amy Coney Barrett wouldn't have a chance to decide that. That would be very good. Of course, she would move on to try to reconsider Roe in very short order. I think if they try to get rid of Roe, the public outcry would be enormous about that too. I think if Roe were about to fall, suddenly everybody would be for immediately expanding the Supreme Court, for packing it immediately to prevent Roe from going down. Avril said, is that good or bad? Avril says, yes, from Handmaids. Susan says, anyone know how McGrath is doing against Senator McConnell? Yeah, I think he was in the lead 46-39 from the latest poll in Kentucky. She's a terrible candidate, a terrible, terrible candidate. I mean, she has the charisma of a wet noodle. I'm telling you, she's just awful. It was such a tragedy, such a bonehead play by Schumer running her instead of somebody like Charlie Booker. He should have just left it to the state. He should have just left it to them. Then Amy McGrath would never have raised her $40 million, and she wouldn't have won the primary. Charlie Booker would have won the primary. And then money would be pouring into Charlie Booker to knock off Mitch. And he would have done so because Charlie Booker knows how to campaign. And Rebecca McCloskey said, I don't know, Avril. I could be a little bit of both. Susan says, what is the new FB format? Mine still looks the same. Well, mine kind of looks the same, but when I click on the groups, okay, I mean, I don't get my usual. I mean, I can't search for groups anymore. I mean, after I've come up with a certain number of groups, I can't search for other groups. And some of the groups that I'm an admin of don't appear. I mean, they don't appear for me to to share to those groups. I have 2 groups, okay, that I'm an admin of. I'm not talking pages now. Okay? I'm talking groups. The Certified Letter Group and the Biden Record Group. And they didn't show me those groups. When I clicked on the button, the drop down didn't show me those groups. It's outrageous. Right-wing Catholics, not all Catholics are right-wing. Right, that's very true. Not all Catholics are right-wing. In fact, the Catholics in the United States were a mainstay of the New Deal. Cora says Catholics are a large voting bloc. Yes, they are. And Rebecca says, I would hope we could get, okay, an atheist. Well, I think we almost had one in Bernie Sanders. I mean, I think that Bernie is at least an agnostic. I mean, I don't know if he's really technically, okay, an atheist. But, yeah, we almost got him. Errol says, evangelicals are over Agolf. They don't care. They're just concerned over keeping their oppressive will over the public while they get freaky with the pool boy. Oh, God. Stacy says, effing Barrett pronounced poignant with the G. She pronounced poignant as poignant. I never heard anybody pronounce poignant as poignant. Did she really say that? I mean, she's a professor from Notre Dame. How could she say that? Evelina says, but how are Jews and Catholics minorities in America? Are they really? How so? Well, just by numbers. There are more Protestants than Catholics in the United States. I mean, still, a majority of us are Protestants, okay, or at least a plurality. How many of us are Catholics? I don't know, 30 to 35% or something like that. Okay, and how many are Jews? Well, there are probably, I don't know what the latest population figures on Jews in the United States are, probably about 6 million or 7 million. I got to check that out of 330 million. So Jews are a minority population-wise. I mean, in that sense. Steve says, ironically, the pool boy is a porn movie cliche. Yes. Yes. Alva says, yes, I'm getting big fat captions all over your face. Not sure if it's Avril's phone or something pertaining to FB revisions. Steve says, I have captions. They are small and low. Evangelina says, evangelicals are essentially Protestant. Yeah, they're Protestants. Yeah. They're fundamentalist Protestants. There are lots of sects, okay, of Protestantism in this country. And the evangelicals are those who have a fundamentalist interpretation of the Bible and are out there aggressively seeking converts. Steve Wolfbrand says, oh yeah, that's right. Like I said, getting their freak on while Jesus is watching. Avril says, mine is bigger than yours and smiles. Steve Wolfbrand says, settings. Steve, well, if you would show me yours, I would show you mine. Avril says, Evelina Pont, I have no idea. I don't follow religion. Pardon me, please. Avril says, Steve Wolfbrand, yep, probably. Avril says, Steve Wolfbrand, well, Mr. Big Mac, meet the Whopper. Avril says, oops, this reply was meant for Evelina. Avril Romano says, I'm about to commit Nutella sin. Evelina says, I don't follow religion as much as I would like. Certain aspects of it only. And what aspects of it? Avril asks, Evelina Pont, is Argentina monetarily sovereign? No. Well, did Evelina say no? Let's see. Let's see how Evelina answered that. Is Argentina monetarily sovereign? Evelina says, no retirement for Supreme Court judges. Age for ordinary people is 65. Well, people aren't forced to retire at 65. And Supreme Court justices can retire. Usually they stay on the court until they get ill, but some people simply retired, like, for example, Souter retired from the Supreme Court, okay, and then he served on some of the appeals courts thereafter, continuing to serve, on appeals courts, do good work on appeals courts. He didn't want to be part of the Supreme Court anymore. I guess he wanted a little bit of a vacation. So he retired from the Supreme Court, started receiving his pension. They have very good pensions on the Supreme Court. Howard says, Dr. Joe, what are the names of the 3 most frequent short takes? I don't know what you mean by most frequent short takes, but I'll tell you what the names of the short takes are. Hang on a second. I'll give you the names of the short takes I did this week. In just a second. Let me pull them up. Okay, there's the greenhouse gas chamber, which is 7 minutes and 46 seconds long. There's, as the 2020 election gets closer, are we remembering 2,605 deaths sustained on at 9/11, but forgetting 205,000 deaths from COVID right now, and that was 5 minutes and 32 seconds. Then there's a third called Can Progressives Get Any Significant Policy Changes from a Neoliberal Biden Administration? That one is 9 minutes and 7 seconds. And the fourth one is the main issue in this election is still the pandemic. That was 7 minutes and 8 seconds. And the fifth one is you can't keep beating up progressives and expect them to go to the polls for you. And that one was 13 minutes and 9 seconds. So the last one was the longest one. It was 13 minutes. Hope that helps, Avro. And Evelyn says, Avro mono for internal purposes domestically. That is not international trade. And Avro says, oops. Right, Argentina is not a monetarily sovereign nation because it owes very big debts in currencies not its own in the international system to hedge funders and imperialists. And Kay says, ACA is up for the vote in October, I think. No, I understand the Supreme Court is slated to take up the case 1 week after the election, in the following week after the election. Then I believe I heard today that they would expect a decision on it sometime in maybe January, February, or something like that. Alvaro says, Evelina Pont, why do they make their seniors wait so late? Kay says, Evelina, does Argentina have health care for all? And Rebecca says, the mandate has destroyed my husband and I. We have never not paid our taxes. And when we lost our exception, we were hit with a $3,000 penalty. We didn't have it, and now have not been able to file. He still withholds, so we pay the taxes, but have not filed in 5 years. Oh my God. I'm so scared of our situation, and the mandate that did that to us. I hate the ACA. Well, to tell you the truth, I've always hated the ACA. I've always thought it was a bailout for the pharmaceutical companies and the insurance companies, and it was not good for quite a few people anyway. And on top of that, it still left, I don't know, something like 25 million, over 30 million people still uncovered by the time Obama left office. So in other words, when we passed the ACA, actually in the year when we took up the struggle in 2009, it was estimated 45 million people were not covered by insurance in the United States. From that time until the end of the Obama years, we succeeded in cutting down the number of uninsured from 45 million to roughly 30 million people. Now, the ACA covered more people than that. Yes, it probably ended up covering, 22, 23 million people, 24 million people, something like that. Of course, the difference there is accounted for by the increase in U.S. population between 2009 and 2016. By 2016, we were already up to 320 million people. And when the struggle started, we were at roughly 300 million people. So there were about 20 million people added, which then created a situation where we still had 30 million people uncovered. And the ratio of deaths to people who are uncovered is 1 out of, I think it's something like 876, if I recall correctly. That is the likely ratio, most likely ratio. So that meant that something like, if there were 30 million people uncovered, there was something like 36,000 people per year who were fatalities due to lack of insurance. Terrible to leave that many deaths on the table because you failed to pass H.R. 676. This would be a good MMT teaching moment to show that getting rid of the mandate has no impact on the ACA because Fed taxes don't fund federal programs like the ACA. Well, no. What we're talking about now is not the taxes that they enacted in order supposedly to fund the ACA. This has to do with the mandate taken as a tax, considered as a tax. That was never meant to pay the ACA bills. In other words, that was just a tax that people had to pay if they did not sign up for the ACA. In other words, that was the mandate tax. It was a form of sin tax. It was never intended to fund the ACA. So the fact that it couldn't possibly have funded the ACA anyway, that the other taxes which were enacted to fund the ACA but never did fund the ACA, that doesn't have anything to do with the mandate. Evelina says, Av Romano, 70 for Supreme Court judges, 65 for ordinary people, unless they're teachers, police, and other professions where the retirement is earlier. Avril says, Evelina Pont, thank you for that informative reply. Evelina says, in reality, though, many retire later or never retire. Susan says, how much money does federal government pay to subsidize the for-profit health insurance industry? And how much do they subsidize nonprofit hospitals? Well, I think those figures are available in the CMS, Center for Medicare Services annual reports. Certainly the figure on how much they subsidize nonprofit hospitals is supposedly there. But if you're asking the more general question of how much money does the federal government pay to subsidize the for-profit, I won't say for-profit health insurance industry, but for-profit healthcare, okay, in general. Out of the expenditures for this past year, okay, national healthcare expenditures, I have to look up the latest figures, but last time I looked, they were projected to hit $3.8 trillion for this year for total health care expenditures. There was a study done by Himmelstein, okay, and Wohlhandler that showed that the costs that would be covered by the federal government would be $2.5 trillion. Okay, when you considered all the subsidies, including subsidies for construction of buildings, that 2.5 trillion of that 3.8 trillion would be laid out by the federal government. Something like that. In other words, almost 2/3 of current healthcare expenditures were already being paid for by the federal government. Oh, there might have been some small amount in there that was paid for by state government also. So, but 2/3 were paid for by governments. Okay, it is also estimated, based on the experience of other countries, that if we went with Medicare for All, that our total healthcare expenditures, even after now covering everybody, that our total healthcare expenditures would go down to 2/3 of what they are now. So in other words, what the government is spending now, okay, is enough to cover healthcare, okay, for all Americans and to reduce healthcare spending by 1/3. So what is 1/3 of 3.8 trillion? Maybe $13 trillion. I'm sorry, I don't mean $13 trillion. I mean $1.3 trillion. Something like that. That would be our likely savings if we went to a Medicare for All system. Okay, I don't think that money would be saved. It would be spent on other things. But there are lots of other things we need. So having the private health insurance industry is one way or another costing us $1.3 trillion a year that is going into that industry that could go elsewhere. Evelina says to supplement income, I mean. Alva says, I might move to Nebraska then. Amber waves a grain calling my name. Susan says, also why we need expanded Medicare for all. Steve says, you should have a good tax person look into it. Sometimes the IRS will settle. At this point, they might even owe you money as you haven't been applying for your refunds. Good luck. Susan says, how could anyone vote for McConnell? Steve says, turtles love him. Turtles and frogs. Kay says, but Booker was the best they had there. He was. And for my money, he was the best they had in the whole goddamn region. Steve Day says, we can still knock off Pelosi November 3rd. Shahed for change. Shahed for change. I think Shahed was hurt very badly by the smears that he encountered while running. Steve Wolfbrand, so do grannies from Beverly Hillbillies, says Avro. Steve says, maybe you need to do an FB update, Doc. Well, I've been telling you, I've been getting FB updates. They've been updating something or other. They must be updating it because I can't do the things I did before. Well, they must be screwing it up. Susan Eldred says the elites need to step aside and stop interfering in our elections. If Trump and McConnell win, I blame them. Yeah, me too, sure. If they had stopped interfering, if Obama had kept his hands off the frickin' election, we would have Bernie Sanders ahead by 20 points right now. Kay says, I sure hope so, L. Stephen Day. Ivel says, guys, remember the Bernie Bird moment? That was epic. Yeah. Stephen Day says, spread around Shahed's link. Nancy has never debated an opponent for her seat in California 14th. Kay says, I always do, L. Stephen Day. And damn. Sorry, folks, I scrolled down, lost my place. I'm trying to get back. Susan says, the many Catholics do not agree with the church doctrine. That's why so many have left the church. There are many pro-choice, I know. Pro-gay marriage, they believe priests should be able to marry, don't believe divorce is a sin, etc. I know. But the church still goes on, out of touch with its base, out of touch. They're experts at not changing, even though you're out of touch. And they got enough authoritarians in the church who just sit by and take it. Evelina says aspects of my religion, like mythology, are interesting. And then the political as well. L. Stephen Day says, dump Nancy Pelosi and pick a speaker from the expanded squad. Avro says, could AOC qualify? Sure, she'd qualify. She can qualify as speaker. Speakers don't have to be any particular age. I mean, anybody could be selected as a speaker. In fact, you don't even have to be a member of Congress to be selected as the speaker. Avro says, okay, I saw the 9/11 one. Kay says, I belong to the local United Methodist Church from the time I was a child, but I quit when my first hubby and I were so poor we were living on PBJs and dinner at my mom's. At my mom's, and they kept sending me bills that I was not tithing enough. Shake my head. Churches are supposed to help people. I know. Arvel says, are the short takes in order? Okay, on YouTube. The short takes are in the date of posting order. Okay, on YouTube. I didn't give them to you in that order. But In YouTube, they are in order of posting. And there are 5 of them there, those 5. Steve Day says, how do you pay for a pandemic? Ivel says, yes, that helps. Thank you for the follow-up, Dr. Joe. Of course. Ivel says, Fiat. Kay says, our revolution groups are showing up to protest in Cleveland for the debate. That's great. Ivel says, I've never had the ACA. I wouldn't want it if it wasn't free. Well, I've never had the ACA either because I'm on standard Medicare with a supplement. We have a Medicare Plus supplement through Kaiser. Evelina says, yes, universal health care in Argentina, except that it was defunded under the last administration with Macri, a conservative. Yeah, Macri was awful, wasn't he? Cases, Scott owed many thousands in back taxes when he died. Thankfully, we never made our relationship illegal, that is marriage, or I would have been stuck with that too. Yeah, and you can't get out of the taxes either. Or it's hard. 10 years have to go by before you can get out of the taxes. Evelina gives a thumb up. Susan says, thanks for the clarification, Joe. Sure. And Arrow says, speaking of smears, I wonder if Citolini's makeup smears onto his collar, melts into his eyes under his Nuremberg rallies lights. Evelina says, interesting that you don't even have to belong to Congress to be speaker. Did not know that, Dr. Joe. Yeah, that is an interesting fact. In fact, I've wondered about that. I've wondered if Shahed beats Nancy Pelosi and knocks her out of Congress. I wonder whether it will still be the case that these idiots on the Democratic side vote for her to be speaker anyway. I don't think they will, but that would be awful. That would be awful if they did that. In case Shahed did win. Susan said, AOC pulled out of event for Yitzhak Rabin after pushback from the Palestinian community. For Yitzhak Rabin? Oh, what event was there for Yitzhak Rabin? I mean, he was assassinated by a settler. Was it in 1996 or 1997? I mean, he was trying to make peace with the Palestinians. Never says, I wonder whether Rashida has advised her on that. I find it strange, okay, that you mentioned Robin. But because why would they have an event for him? He was probably the last hope for peace there because he wanted it. And he wanted a two-state solution. It was on Twitter, I see. I didn't see that. Thank you, Susan. Okay, I got to take a look at that because as I say, he was assassinated because he was on the point of making a peace settlement with Palestinians. Yitzhak Rabin was a good guy. Hasn't been anyone like him since over there. And once he was killed, the right wing just took over everything. It's had control of the political system since that time. And what's ironic is that it was a right-winger who did it. I mean, it was a right-winger who assassinated him. I always said, carbs got me all fat and sleepy. And they said Rabin had a policy to break the bones of the Palestinian protesters. God, that's awful. Gee, I never knew that. Break the bones of the Palestinian protesters. That's awful. God. I suppose he might have had that policy, and he might also be in favor of making peace. I guess the two are not really logically exclusive, are they? Oh, God. That's awful. Okay, any other questions or comments? I will say, hell, that's what DT's brown shirts are doing to the protesters here. Susan said he apologized later, but apparently and was ambiguous about support of a two-state solution. Well, I don't know whether he was ambiguous about it. I'm pretty sure that's why the settler killed him. Steve Wolfbrand said, sadly, I fully expect Nancy Pelosi to be reelected. People in SF are loony, and there's a lot of old money up there. Yeah, I fully expect her to be reelected too, because I think Shahed lost a lot of momentum on his campaign when the old staff tried to tank the campaign. I mean, I kind of accept his version of what went on. That sounds right to me. But it seems to me that it just hurt him. I mean, too many of the San Francisco progressive groups just took that smear as gospel. And it really hurt him. Now, I expect he may be picking up ground now, a lot of ground, but there are only 40 days left. And I'm not sure that he has the time. And also, Nancy is still grabbing lots of headlines. I mean, she's always there with the headlines, in Washington. If she still comes up with a deal to give some relief to people, which she just may do, people may buy that from her. In spite of the fact it's because of her screw up that there wasn't a good relief program in the first place. She's to blame for that. And Kay says, thank you, Joe, and everybody for another great discussion. I love you all. We'll miss you on Joe's days off. Well, thank you, Kay. I remember hearing that name on the news a lot when I was young. Yeah, Rabin. Yeah, Yitzhak Rabin. Yeah. He started out as a general in the army. He was he was a hero in the 1967 war. He was a brilliant general. I think he started out in tanks. The AOC Rabin article is in Al Jazeera. Thank you, Susan. I will look into it. Evelina says they never talked about it again. The smear to Shahed, I think it was planned. Yeah, I think it was planned too. I think it was planned also. But there were two aspects of the smear. One was from this Elizabeth Croydon, okay, who knew Shahed. I think it was here in Washington, D.C. Okay, it was in the East. Okay, anyway. And it turns out that Croydon had been creating smears for a number of people. There were many people who knew her back here. Okay, basically, there were many people who were saying or implying that she was a Looney Tune and that there was nothing to her charges against Shahed and Kay at all. There were people who knew them both. And there was nothing but admiration for Shahed. So, with his work back here in D.C. and his work up in New York, he had very great support from people who knew him earlier. So that was one of the smears that hit. Now, the San Francisco staff group he had was angry at him because they couldn't carry the weight of his campaign, and so he replaced them. So they were angry at him because of conflicts that occurred within the campaign over what should be done in the campaign. Okay. They were basically standing in the way of volunteers doing their work in the campaign. So Shahed replaced them. But then they heard about the smear from Croydon, and they picked up on that smear, and they used that smear in San Francisco groups to try to blacken Shahed's name. And a lot of the groups didn't investigate it. They just took it at face value, and they went off half-cocked, and they pulled out of support for Shahed. Do I think there is any truth in what is being said about Shahed? No, I do not think so. Notice, I don't think the substance of the charges are true. And in that sense, there's no truth to it. Now, was there a conflict between Shahed and some of his staff members early on in the campaign? Yes, there obviously was. Is it possible that he was brusque to some of them, and some of them might have thought that there was a gender bias to that? That's possible. I mean, I don't know. That relies partly on the perceptions of those who are claiming that Shahed is a hard-driving kind, of personality. I think it's notable that you haven't heard any complaints since the complaints of the previous staff. You haven't heard any complaints from anybody in his campaign since that time. People haven't left, apparently, and there haven't been any complaints. There's no the corroboration of the idea that he was a bad boss. So I tend to doubt that as well. But I completely doubt the sexism charges, basically. I don't think that's true at all. Croydon also made charges against Kevin Zeese, but she lost the case in court. Right. And Margaret Flowers did not credit any of it. Any of it. I was going to say that I had the impression that Kevin and Margaret think that she's a Looney Tune. Kay says, no, Susan, I don't. Howard says, I'm going to have a serious talk with those cow patties. Susan says, not sure if it was Croydon, but similar charges were made against Zeese, but were later thrown out for lack of evidence. Yeah, I mean, Kevin, gee. People with false fragility syndrome, aka wussies, are offended by hard-driving personalities and are usually pathologically envious. Perhaps. I'm not going to say that's the case, okay, in those cases, but Kevin Zeese is a very hard-driving person, but in my limited contact with him, he was nothing but courteous and decent and helpful. And he had a reputation in the community for that, for going out of his way to help people. Even when he didn't completely agree with them on things, he would go out of his way to help them to do the things they wanted to do. He helped people in their careers. And all we hear about Kevin Zeese is that he was really a terrific guy. Evelina says you should be a psychologist. Don't laugh out loud. Steve says the pandemic is making it hard for progressive challengers. No ground games. Yes, absolutely. That's absolutely true. It's made it harder for progressive challengers because progressive challengers rely on the ground game. No question about it. I think if he could have had a good ground game, I think Alex Morse would have won his contest. And Richie Neal would be getting ready to vacate his offices in Washington, D.C. Evelyn says, you should be a psychologist, laugh out loud. Avril said, I was reading Shahed. And Avril says, Evelina, you have to be crazy to be a psychologist. Yes, or at least a therapist. It must be very, very challenging these days to be a therapist. Very challenging. What are Trump's genocidal COVID numbers now? Okay, first, I did mean to give you a little news about that, so it's glad you raised the question. First piece of news I want to give you that as of today, the RT Live site shows that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 states have a reproduction rate at this point that's less than 1. The lowest reproduction rate at this point, the estimate of the lowest reproduction rate, is South Carolina, 0.86. Virginia, which last time I looked was over 1, has a reproduction rate of 0.88, which means cases in Virginia at this point are on the decrease. Now, in a couple of days, they may go back up on the increase. I've noticed that these ratings of the reproduction rate are very volatile. For example, not too long ago, Hawaii was way high up there, 1.2 or so. However, today it's down at 0.9. DC, 0.91, Ohio, 0.91, Washington State, 0.92, Alabama, 0.93, Arizona, 0.94, California, 0.97, Florida, 0.98. Now, Texas was somewhere in the 0.9s last week sometime. Now, Texas, let's see where Texas is. Texas is at 1.04 now. There are a lot of states arrayed between 1.00 and 1.04. Okay, in those states, the rate of reproduction In other words, the cases are fairly constant or are just starting to rise. The state of New York is in that category. It's at 1.01 right now. So it's started going up again. Texas, as I said, is at 1.04. And Connecticut, which at various times has been way down there, some in the low 0.8s, now 1.07. But so 34 states either have constant rates of new cases or increasing rates, of new cases. Worst in the country is Wyoming right now. They're 1.29, and North Carolina is at 1.27. Missouri 1.15, which is an appreciable rate, of acceleration of COVID. Now, on the coronavirus itself, this is a good time to check and see how we did today. According to the Worldometer site, okay. So today we had 737 deaths. We are at September 26th. We're 209,177, according to the Worldometer site. 631 deaths per million. So Friday's figure was 895. Saturday's figure is 737. Tomorrow's the 27th. We have the 27th, 28th, 29th, and 30th still to go. We will pass 210,000, most probably by Monday, 210,000. Okay, Monday is the 28th. So as I said, before the end of the month. One last piece of news there. Okay, the UK, and remember we just passed them, I don't know, 4 days ago or something. They're at 617 deaths per million. We're at 631 deaths per million right now. 14 deaths per million above them. We're only 6 deaths per million behind the nation, of Ecuador. We've been catching up to them quick. We have a chance by the end of the month to go past Ecuador. That would put us 7th in the world, discounting the 2 small nations. Okay. So, that's the COVID news in terms of how we've been doing. Okay, so Avril says everyone is a little psycho. Kay says, Evelina Ponte worked for years at the old state mental hospital on male crisis before Reagan closed them down. Best job I ever had, laugh out loud. And Steve says, Florida has lifted all restrictions on COVID. Evelina Ponte, I'm a lot a bit crazy, says Avro. Evelyn says, Avro, Mono, that's okay, we'll keep it in the family. Kay says, I think I must be too, Evelina Ponte, will laugh out loud. Avro says, thank you for your service and dedication. And Avro says, hashtag Death Santis. Evelina says, well then, me too, don't want to feel left out. Avro says, Evelina Ponte, yeah, the Adams family. Evelina Ponte says, Avro Mono, guess I'm a tango freak then. Laugh out loud. Evelina says, you can be Letitia, was it? Avro says, ha. Avro says something about going dancing. I knew you were going dancing on Saturday nights when you're not here, laugh out loud. Evelina says, Avro Mono, I wish, laugh out loud. Avro says, Evelina Ponte with a crazy rose bloom cutting off self. Evelina says, but you can be Letitia. I think that was her name. And Rebecca says, Halloween is coming, and I wonder how many will not be observing because of COVID. We will have a downtown trick-or-treat, and I imagine it will be canceled. Kay says, even though these discussions are serious, you guys always make me truffle, laugh out loud. Evelina says, Kay can be the cute blonde. Steve says, good night, all. Good night, Steve. And good night, all. I think on that note, I'm going to end the broadcast. Thank you for coming. Thank you for staying.